Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon to participate in this program as a part of the Law and Democracy Speaker Series. My name is Maya Dombrowski. I'm a member of the class of 2029, studying government and German. At Dartmouth, I dance with Street Soul, compete with the Women's Ultimate Frisbee team, and am involved in art and activism with Dartmouth's intersectional feminist magazine, Spare Rib. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to today's program. We're grateful to Dartmouth Dialogues, the Office of the Dean and the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and the Office of the Associate Dean for the Social Sciences, and the Center for Business, Government, and Society for being partners in making this program in the Law and Democracy series. We'd like to welcome our virtual attendees who are joining us today via live stream. For those joining us in person, when we reach the audience Q&A portion of our program, you can raise your hand and one of our student assistants will bring you a microphone. Be sure to wait for the microphone before speaking to make sure that everyone in the room and on our live stream can hear you. As a reminder, Dartmouth is committed to protecting free expression and peaceful dissent. We encourage you to ask questions during the Q&A, but ask that you do not interfere or disrupt today's program, which would include preventing attendees from seeing or hearing our guest and moderator, or interfering with our guest and moderator's ability to speak or be heard. This conversation will be moderated by Professor Charles Whelan, Clinical Professor of Business Administration and Faculty Director for the Center of Business, Government, and Society at Tuck School of Business. Our first guest, Peter Charalambous, class of 2020, is an investigative reporter and producer with ABC News, based in New York. He covers national legal and political stories for ABC's broadcast, audio, and digital platforms, contributing to breaking news and in-depth reporting. He covers criminal justice issues in the New York region, the Supreme Court, and the Trump administration's relationship to the federal judiciary. Prior to joining ABC News, Peter worked as a paralegal for the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. He then started with ABC's National Assignment Desk in 2022 before joining ABC's Investigative Unit in 2023. We are also honored to have with us Jonathan Karl, Chief Washington Correspondent for ABC News and the co-anchor of This Week on ABC. The former president of the White House Correspondents Association, Karl is the author of 4 New York Times bestsellers: Front Row at the Trump Show, Betrayal, The Final Act of the Trump Show, Tired of Winning, Donald Trump and the End of the Grand Old Party, and his latest book, Retribution, Donald Trump and the Campaign That Changed America. Karl has won numerous journalism awards, including 2 Walter Cronkite Awards for National Individual Achievement and Excellence in TV Political Journalism, several Emmy Awards, and the White House Correspondents Association's Award for Excellence in Presidential News Coverage under deadline pressure in 2020 and 2021. Mediaite named Karl one of the top 10 most influential news media personnel in 2021. Karl served as the chief White House correspondent for ABC News from December 2012 through the end of the Trump administration in January 2021. He's served as ABC's chief political correspondent, chief national security correspondent, and chief foreign affairs correspondent. He's reported from more than 30 countries. Before joining ABC News, Karl worked for 8 years as a CNN correspondent covering Congress, national politics, and the White House. His writing has appeared in numerous publications, including The Atlantic, Vanity Fair, and The Wall Street Journal. Please join me in warmly welcoming Jonathan Karl, Peter Charalambous, and Charlie Whelan to the stage.
Well, thank you both for coming. Peter's a former student of mine. I think you're the first former student ever to be up doing this kind of interview. So it's a rite of passage for both of us.
This is an honor.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So Jonathan, let me start with you. I read the book. It is going to cover familiar topics for everybody in the room. It's stuff that we all lived through. And as I read it, I'm like, oh, I remember that. But what I didn't realize is how many consequential things happened in rapid succession, almost at the same time. And so my question for you is, why did you want to go back and relive all of that?
Well, look, I never intended to do any of these books, and now I've done 4. And what drove me to write the first one is what ultimately ended up here. I realized I was covering a series of events that people would be trying to comprehend, get some sort of meaning out of for a long time. I had a very unique vantage point. I found myself in the White House covering Donald Trump, somebody who I had known longer than anybody in the White House, with the exception of his daughter Ivanka. Because I first met him in 1994 as a young reporter with the New York Post. And I wanted, if 50 or 100 years from now, if people were to ask the question, what the hell was that like? And how did it happen? That they would at least have a sense for my book. And then, you know, we go through January 6th, and the events leading up to January 6th happened, and I wrote another book. And then Trump begins this absolutely improbable effort to get back to the White House again. And I felt that I first of all, I witnessed history being rewritten and whitewashed by people, trying to totally reinterpret or pretend things didn't happen that we know it happened. And I felt like I needed to get down for the historic record this draft of history. And this election was unlike any election that we have ever seen. And it's not just Trump's improbable return and the fact that he was going into an election where he was either going to face the very serious likelihood of going to prison or becoming the most powerful president of our lifetime. And Shakespearean drama surrounding Joe Biden, a very good chunk of this book gets into what happened with Biden, how it came about that he dropped out of the race, the pressures that he was under, how the decision-making was going on, and then the rapid rise and fall of Kamala Harris. And then the book, a third of this book, is about what happened after the election and the transition that brought us to where we are now. So, you know, sorry for the long answer, but it's...
Well, the next question I have, it even says Shakespearean. So obviously we have the two protagonists, Biden and Trump, so consequential in many ways. But let's work our way up there. As I was reading, there's also a Shakespearean cast of characters.
Yes.
Everybody, Steve Biden, Steve Bannon, Jill Biden, Ron Clinton. I mean, these are all people.
Hunter Biden.
Hunter Biden, right? So they all play their own roles, but so many of them are unique. So let's start with some of the smaller characters that you fleshed out and how they add up to this enormous drama. And then we'll get to the big players.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, one of the absolutely bizarre things about this election for me covering it is I was in regular contact, usually over the phone, with Hunter Biden, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and for a spell, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And I mean, sometimes the calls would come in like
therapy?
Yes, I mean, this is. I mean, I think there was nobody else on the planet that was talking to these people with some regularity. And look, Steve Bannon is probably the person that can help, probably illustrates more what Trumpism, what the MAGA movement is really about than probably any other human being. I mean, he was the chief strategist in the first White House, famously had a horrible falling out, and then was the person that was talking to Donald Trump on January 5th and January 6th and was telling the world that all hell was going to break loose. I mean, probably more than anybody other than Donald Trump helped create the series of events that led to what happened on January 6th. And then he goes to prison right as this campaign is getting underway. And he goes to prison because he, contempt of Congress, refusing to cooperate in any way with the January 6th committee. So he is a made man in Trump world. This guy went to prison to defy Liz Cheney to protect Donald Trump from any inquiry into what was happening on January 6th. And one of the most fascinating things that I learned about was what life was like for Steve Bannon in prison And
So here's my next question. Bannon in prison. I'm glad we're on mind on here. Because this is something most people are not familiar with. I found it totally fascinating. So he's kind of cut out. He says it's terrible, but he's kind of cut out for the prison yard. So let's talk about both Steve Bannon in prison communicating with Trump, and then getting out and boom, not missing a step.
So he's at the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut. They call it a low security prison, but it's not. The prison camps are the kind of places where most white collar criminals go. This is actually a pretty tough place. And Bannon is in there for 4 months. They have access. There's 48 prisoners in his section of the yard. There are 4 computers that they're allowed to sign up for 15-minute increments, and they're not connected to the internet. But they can they can write emails, and then they go through the Bureau of Prisons, and then the Bureau of Prisons reviews them, and they get sent out. So Bannon was constantly on these computers and getting emails back and forth from his people. What I learned is he was sending stuff to Trump and his campaign advisors through code. Never, dear Donald, and it was in this prison that he befriended. It kind of boggles the mind, because I spent hours speaking to Bannon after he got out. And he told me about the people that he befriended, and he had this new appreciation for something that Jared Kushner had helped Trump institute in the first term, the First Step Act, which allows for early release for prisoners, prison reform, all this stuff now. And Bannon hated it when he was in the White House. Now he loves it, okay? So he tells me that he befriends this guy named Vito. And he says Vito was a mob hitman. And he gives me the whole history of Vito, and he was in a max security. He'd sentenced to 30-some years, and now he had made his way to Danbury, and he became his buddy. And he talks all these stories about Vito, a mob hitman, greatest guy. He says, the most MAGA guy you've ever met. I come in, he knew exactly who I was. He was quoting back Trump's speeches to me. So, Bannon's a little bit of a bullshitter, so I'm like, he's not really the guy. Vito, what's his last name? Corleone? So I'm like, so Steve, tell me Vito's name. His last name. He's like, well, I got to make sure it's okay with Vito. This goes on for a while. And then he tells me that Vito has been released from prison, and that Bannon says he helped him get released using the First Step Act, early release. And he sends me a video, which I'll show you later. He sends me a video of this guy Vito coming out of the razor wire, out of the prison that was shot by one of Vito's buddies who went to pick him up. And he's greeted by his girlfriend. Vito's greeted by his girlfriend. And he comes out, and this guy's in a white Tacchini, Sergio Tacchini, is that the tracksuit? White tennis shoes, a black little leather bag, his hair is perfectly slicked back, and he comes over to greet his guys. Let's get out of here. This looked like a scene out of Sopranos. But again, I'm like, so now I want to talk to Vito. And it's like, Steve, what's Vito's last name, and how can I get a hold of him? I'm trying to find it. So this is where Peter comes in. So I'm like, Peter, you know the law, you know what's going on. Bannon is stonewalling me. We have to find out, first of all, who this dude is, and was he really a mob hitman, and what it is.
This was very unhelpful when you were like, he's a mobster, his name is Vito, he maybe spent time at FCI Danbury. Can we figure out who this is? But I don't exactly how we pieced it together.
So here's the final trick. A little AI actually helped me, because I was not helping any. So you guys know Perplexity? Helps you search a little bit deeper. So I loaded up the picture of Vito from still from the video, everything I knew about him, and voila, I found out who it was. And everything Bannon had told me was 100% correct. His name is Vito Guzzo. You can look him up. He pled guilty in 1998 to 5 murders and a few counts of attempted murder and arson and a bunch of other stuff. Pled guilty to avoid a life sentence, death penalty, pled guilty. It was a big story, New York Times, huge write-up, describing the scene in the courtroom. And this is the guy that Steve Bannon is telling me is more MAGA than anybody you've ever met. And who he helped get out of prison. Anyway, it's not like a central part of this campaign, but it was like an incredibly revealing.
And it does fit together. So during this period, Trump is on trial, which we all remember, except that once the immunity decision came down, then we kind of moved on. But that hadn't come down.
No.
So we're going to move from our minor cast of characters to the protagonists. So my question for Peter, and then I'll come back and ask Jonathan the same thing, is what were the insights you gained about Trump from watching him in the courtroom, where he was constrained in how he could behave, a whole different environment?
No, I mean, that's a great question, in part because I think this is actually how I met John for the first time. So I think Trump goes on trial, I think April 15th in New York. I cover the courts for ABC generally, and they needed someone to sit in the courtroom every day for the entire duration of the trial. And you're basically stuck in there, and I got like that job. And I think
It's a grim place.
It's a really dingy courthouse. Luigi Mangione is going on trial at in that courthouse potentially this summer. It's like a historic courthouse, but it's not nice. It's not glamorous. It is by no means something that Trump is used to. And I think I'd been covering it for like 2 or 3 weeks. And I think the New York desk, which kind of assigns out work, basically called me one day and said, John Karl is coming up from DC. He kind of wants to sit in the courtroom and see what's going on. Would you mind trading seats with him for an afternoon? And I was like, okay, no problem. That's like, it's a nice out for me. I think you came in. I don't think you brought a laptop. I think you brought no electronics. And I was a little unimpressed because you like showed up completely, like just a notebook only. You took
Old school.
Yes. You took my binoculars,
Yes.
which were very nifty and handy for you.
Little opera glasses are fantastic.
And like I had been covering this trial day by day and like writing about kind of like the nuances of the testimony and where things were, but there were certain like intangible qualities that I was having trouble as like a relatively new reporter describing. And in particular, there was this phenomenon where Trump was closing his eyes all the time. And at one point, the New York Times claimed that he was sleeping, and that was like a whole side arc of the trial. And you went in there for an afternoon, like you just took my binoculars and a notepad, and you came out and you wrote this note describing what you thought was happening. And it was Michael Cohen's testimony, who was kind of the star witness. And you described how like it felt like Trump was ignoring him in a way. And to me, it was kind of astonishing as a reporter who's still trying to figure this all out, because describing like what happened is not that difficult. It's pretty easy to, insofar as you can type quickly, describe what happened in the testimony. Describing how it happened is a whole different craft, and it takes, I'm sure, years to figure out. And I think in that one afternoon, watching you kind of synthesize what I was struggling to synthesize, to describe over the course of weeks, I was just kind of like, oh wow, this guy kind of knows what he's doing.
I mean, it's important to point out that so the trial is not televised. So the way I followed the trial for the day, and I ended up being there, spent 2 days in the courtroom during Cohen's testimony. The way I followed it was Peter's notes, because he's in there. It's not televised. But he's sending out a blow by blow of what's happening, and some of it ends up in this book. It is such a defining moment of this campaign, because Trump is effectively under arrest. He is compelled to be there 4 days a week. He cannot leave that building. The first thing I noticed after Peter gave me his opera glasses, walking into the building, was this big plastic black thing on the ground. It was a rat trap. You go by a rat trap when you walk in the door. You see signs warning you of danger. There's asbestos removal going on. The fluorescent lights kind of flicker in a really kind of annoying and kind of dark way. It's marble, floors that are so dirty and almost brown in the crud that's on them. This building was built in the 30s, and it looked like it hadn't been cleaned since it was built. And this is the place that Trump has to go into every day. And the first thing I noticed when he came in, so I come in, you sit down, there's like, how many reporters? 50?
Maybe 50, 60, yeah.
So set number of reporters on these wooden benches, and we sat down, the court reporter comes in and sits down. The lawyers come in, and then it's Trump's turn to come in from the back, and he's walking from the back in every day, and multiple times a day because they would have lunch breaks and stuff. And this was the one time where Trump was like very animated. I mean, in a kind of a WWE walking into the ring kind of a way. So I see him come in, and he doesn't want to acknowledge that he's looking, but you can tell he's looking from side to side to see which reporters are there. And I just remember he saw me, and I had not seen him for a long time, and we have a bit of a history. And he just looked at me, and like oh great.
I mean, what was so odd about it was, over the course of this 6 or so week trial, I think other reporters and other networks started figuring out how much color was playing out in the room. So they started sending their top talent in there. So like John, they sent CNN was sending like Anderson Cooper and Caitlin Collins to sit in the room, and MSNBC were sending all their anchors to go in there and kind of have their moment. And it got to the point where like Trump had these like rituals where he would like scope out the courtroom, he would see who's in attendance some days, and his staff would print out a bunch of like social media posts for him to like sift through every day, to the point in which Boris Epstein, one of Trump's like right-hand man during this period when he was not president, would like basically like be like passing news stories to like reporters to like kind of interplay between Trump and them, because like he didn't have anything to do but just sit there. And he had something
hour after hour after hour with like some really embarrassing testimony. I mean, this is like not a really like glorious moment for a guy that had been president. And I got to tell you, I mean, it was at precisely the moment that he had clinched the Republican nomination. I mean, he had completely taken over the party. I mean, the Speaker of the House came up to New York to be on hand for the trial for one day.
You had
the Senate leadership. I mean,
some of the most powerful Republicans in the country were coming to sit in like the front row of this courtroom. And Trump, I guess, when he wasn't sitting there quietly, and he wasn't allowed to say anything the entire trial. Every break, though, he could go out into the hallway, and it's a very dark and grim hallway, and they'd have a pool camera set up. So it's one camera on behalf of all the TV networks, where he could go out and make remarks. But the mics were really bad, so he basically like had to shout, and he basically like used this as an opportunity to vent. But he wasn't allowed to talk about the trial because there was a gag order in place. So he would like complain about how cold the courtroom was. He like had this theory that like they were keeping it freezing intentionally, and like that's where he made his first remarks after he got convicted. And it was like this very defiant speech where he basically came out. He had just been convicted. You could literally hear the cheers from outside, from the New Yorkers responding. And he came out and said something along the lines of like, this doesn't matter. The only verdict that matters is election day. And like,
in some ways he was right, because we should remind people at the same time, the Secret Service is preparing for the contingency that he might be going to prison.
Yeah.
You know, what facilities are we going to take over? And again, that's just one of these confluences that's so striking.
Yeah.
But let's stick to one of our protagonists, then we'll switch to what's happening with Biden. You've covered Trump since the 90s when he was a real estate guy. You were with the New York Post. So answer the trillion-dollar question. What makes this guy tick? Because I still don't feel like I have a grasp of it. When he gets up in the morning, what is he trying to optimize?
I mean, the reason why the beginning of all this for me in terms of the books is front row at the Trump show. It's the Trump show. I mean, he wants to be the center of attention. He wants to be the most famous person on the planet. And by the way, he totally succeeded in doing that. I mean, the world's obsessed with this guy. I mean, they may be horrified, but they're talking about him everywhere.
Like we're talking about him.
And we're talking about him here at Dartmouth. I mean, I remember, by the way, taking my daughter to look at UPenn, and you go through the kind of tour, and they show you all the famous people from Benjamin Franklin on down that are connected to the University of Pennsylvania, and there's no Trump. This is before he got, you know, this is I mean right after he got elected president. But it's like, you know, I mean, but he wants to be the center of attention. That's always been the case. That's always been who he is. I think it became a little bit more complicated as he made his way back to the White House this time. And that is, and a lot of it is sitting through that courtroom and going through the indignities that he went through, from the mugshot in Georgia, the federal indictments, all of this, the impeachment trial where 7 Republicans joined every Democrat in voting to convict him. All of that is the thirst for revenge, is absolutely a motivator. And I'll add another one. I think this was not the case. This is not the Trump that I knew in New York, and not the Trump that I saw in the first term. He's thinking about his place in history, which is strange because Trump's never been a person that cares at all about history, in my sense, or have much like nuanced appreciation of it. But suddenly now, you go to the White House, you see something you didn't see when he was there last time, besides the gold. All these portraits of the other presidents. I mean, there were a couple in the, he had Andrew Jackson and he had Reagan, but I mean, he never really cared about that stuff. Now the Oval Office has all these portraits of the presidents. Polk is in there, for God's sake. And then the colonnade has every single president, except for Biden, which has the auto pen, but every single president, because he's thinking, I don't know if it's a sense now of he's older, they tried to kill him, he's, you know, there's a sense of mortality, or what it is, but he is thinking, and that's why I think this administration is in many ways far more consequential, and the potential damage that can be done to the country and to the world is, I mean, he wants to change the world. He wants to make a mark. Some of it is more superficial, the changes to the White House. He didn't do that last time. I mean, now he's building a ballroom, and he wants to build an arch, you know, big arch on the other side of the Lincoln Memorial. He's renaming everything after himself, which he did in business. But I mean, he is changing the physical layout of Washington, D.C., and he's changing the way, you know, our politics work, our alliances with our allies. I mean, it's changing it in a much more fundamental and lasting way than he did the first time.
There are plenty of self-important people in the world, but he is pretty good at it in the sense that he is a brilliant performer, and I think one of the most engrossing and detailed chapters is the assassination attempt of Butler.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, I think you pointed out, nobody in history who has been through an assassination attempt pops up to get the photo op. So talk about that and how truly extraordinary it is, and then how it plays back into the character we've been describing. So
let me jump to the trip to the hospital, and I'll get back to that. I mean, one of the astounding things that I learned is so they rush him to the hospital in Butler. They don't know, has he been hit? I mean, they don't know the extent. They know he's bleeding and there's been shot. So they get into the SUV and they rush to this little hospital in Butler. And as he's led out of the car and into the hospital, 3 of his aides are standing at the door, and he says to him, "How's it playing? How's it playing on TV?" And then once he gets into his room and they put him in, he wants to see the pictures. And he saw that picture, this one here, while he was in the hospital. He said, "That's iconic."
Correctly so.
Correctly so. Now, by the way, let me do a slight little diversion, which is, I think one of the most troubling things about our time is what I've called in the past like a war on truth. That we now have not just have people in different parts of the political spectrum. We have people that live in their own realities, and will, you know, deny something that you see happened. I mean, you know, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? And, you know, I mean, look at what's happened in Minneapolis. You have, you know, official government figures coming out and saying things that are blatantly untrue, that everybody in the world can see is untrue. There's nothing new about officials who don't tell the truth or shade the truth, but the degree to which this is done. And it's created, and then throw in the technological changes we're seeing with AI. And you really, it's created a level of distrust in any source of official information. Some of the distrust is very well earned. Butler, that photograph, some people respond to that picture by saying that's all staged. And a lot of people, I mean, a lot of people really believe that. I mean, it wasn't staged. I mean, I don't know exactly what happened with his ear and if it was, but you know, it was, I mean, this happened and a guy died. 2 people had serious life-changing injuries. You know, Crooks was on the roof, but the conspiracies on far left and far right, and just I don't believe that happened. And I think it's one of the real troubling things about where we are, and makes it harder to get to a different place. But for him, those shots rang out. They take him down, and then they've got to get him in. They rush the SUV. They've got the Secret Service protocol. You keep him down. You keep him covered. You stuff him into the armored SUV, and you get him out. That's what you do. And he fought, and I went through, and I found with Peter's help too. We went and we got these transcripts of testimony that the Secret Service agents that were there gave. Transcripts that were available publicly, but nobody had like really known they were there. I mean, it was like they'd been part of a report that Congress had done, and they were like.
It was like a byproduct of the fact that summer was just such an intense news cycle that this entire congressional investigation played out in terms of what happened at Butler. And, you know, I think the report itself kind of went under the radar. And we were looking through it, and it's a huge volume, and it's got, you know, a very large index, and it cites back to these interviews, and you go through them, and it just kind of sheds a completely new light in terms of what it was like, for example, for the Secret Service agents, where, you know, Trump, you know, is taking incoming fire, and Trump's instinct in that moment was to kind of fight back and to be defiant, to take that shot. And the Secret Service agent didn't know what to do in that moment because, you know, they're trained to immediately take them down, to get them to a safe place. And they've never seen or even comprehended the idea that a candidate in that moment would have that kind of reaction. And the entirety of the kind of the sequence of events that day, the institutional failure that took place in terms of how a person could have gotten so close. And again, this was the first of 2 assassination attempts that were quite serious. We're talking about the president being a few hundred yards-ish away from a high-power rifle. The one in Florida was less serious in a way, but it was kind of remarkable to look back, you know, a few months after, now that the news cycle had slowed down a bit, to better understand how that actually played out.
And he's fighting with the people that are protecting him.
Yeah.
And by doing this, he's exposing himself once again if there's another gunman, which they don't know at that point whether there is. But he knew that was going to be a defining moment.
Yeah. So our Shakespearean drama has another key actor we haven't talked about at all, which is Joe Biden. And one of the words that comes up in the book often is loyalty. And this is one of those things, I'm no longer a big fan of the word loyalty as it's being
we used
used.
to like it, right?
So, you know, and so I think there are plenty of people probably here, you know, left of center saying, looking at the Republican Senate, for example, saying, why are these people so beholden to the president? When we know, say, from Mitt Romney's biography, that often the Republicans are laughing when Trump leaves the room. But what you expose is a lot of very similar loyalty on the Democratic side. People afraid to say that Biden may not be capable of running again, afraid to buck Kamala Harris as the heir apparent. I mean, there's a lot of people whispering in the background there that maybe they should have said some stuff out loud. So walk us through that, because that is so consequential to this story.
Yeah. I mean, I try to provide a revealing anecdote to get into this phenomenon, and what I landed on was was the great Russian dissident Navalny had written in letters to a friend of his, what is going on with the Democrats and Biden? Don't they realize that he could like stumble and fall, and then Trump, who's really dangerous, could have a clean path to coming, you know, back into the White House? This is a guy in the most hellish Russian gulag, you know, in Siberia, who's got more of an awareness of the idea that there is potentially some problems in running Biden again for re-election than the people down the hallway from the Oval Office. And if you read Navalny, which I put in there, Navalny's letter on this, it's just like, it's chilling because he sees it very clear. Look, it's astounding that the Democrats never seriously considered the question of whether or not there should be somebody else to run. There was a perception during the primary as Biden became ascendant once again in 2020 that he would serve one term. He never made the promise, but there was a clear perception. He said it, there was a famous event after the Michigan primary where he said, I'm going to be the bridge to the next generation. And, Cory Booker's on the stage with him, Gretchen Whitmer's there, and Kamala Harris is on the stage with him. And so there was a perception that he was not going to run again. So the reason why I was talking to Hunter a lot is that Hunter was the person talking to his father every day and had more of an insight, especially in the weeks before he finally dropped out, into what was going on with Joe Biden than his closest aides. Certainly more than his chief of staff or his campaign manager. And Hunter told me something, and I had a series of conversations that were kind of, I was writing a book. He would talk freely if I wasn't going to use any of it until after the campaign was over. And then his father drops out, so I go out to see him before the election because I don't want it colored by whether or not, what happens in the end. And he told me something astounding, which is, I was like, so when did you decide, when was the decision made that your father would run again? And his answer was, it was never made. And then I went back and talked to some Biden's senior aides, political advisors. None of them could think of a single meeting that was held, pros and cons of running for re-election again. And I'll jump ahead to right before he drops out. Once, after the debate, obviously things changed dramatically, and now all of a sudden.
But even then, it moved slower.
It moved really slow. You think it's slower than you probably remembered, right? You go back and
my recollection is I can't believe people are still insisting.
Yeah. So Nancy Pelosi was a key player in this. Nancy Pelosi, by the way, never actually ever went out publicly and said Joe Biden should step down. And she actually never said it to him privately either, but it was clear that she was kind of encouraging this. She went on Morning Joe after Biden made this big pronouncement. I'm done. The decision is made. Stop bothering me with this. I am running. I've got the delegates. I have the votes. You guys need to go home. I am the nominee. And she came out the next morning and said, well, Joe's got a decision to make about whether or not he wants to run. The morning after she made those comments on Morning Joe, we knew that she had a meeting or a call. Sometimes it was reported as a call. Sometimes it was a meeting with Biden. Sometimes after that, but it was all so hush hush. It was hard to figure out when it was. But I learned that it was it was 10 o'clock in the morning after that call on Morning Joe, and it was so secret that the people in the West Wing didn't know it was happening. Nancy Pelosi arranged the meeting by reaching out to a very interesting aide that Biden had named Annie Tomasini, who was basically considered like the second Biden daughter. I mean, like a member of the family. And she arranged for Nancy Pelosi to secretly come into the White House, not the way you see everybody come in through the West Wing, but through the residence, over near that East Wing that got torn down the other day, and to come up through a secret elevator and all this stuff. And nobody knew the meeting was going on, and it was the two of them. And what I learned about this meeting was that Nancy Pelosi was conveying the concerns that a lot of Democrats had. You should think about this, Joe. I can't tell you what you should do. And pretty blunt conversation about the polling. And but she doesn't go so far as to say you have to get out. And these two are devout Catholics. So at the end of the meeting, Pelosi suggests that they should pray together. And she brings out a little coin she carries with her, a little rosary coin that she always has on her presence. And Biden has the same thing in his pocket. So they pray over their rosaries, bid each other farewell. And to this day, unless something happened yesterday I don't know about, those two icons of the last 30, 40 years of Democratic politics have not spoken. It was the last conversation they had. Because the way Biden, and especially his family, sees it, Nancy Pelosi was disloyal.
Back to our loyalty.
Yep.
All right, we're going to take questions, so please raise your hand and wait for the microphone. Devorah's got it in the back. Questions?
Thank you, sir.
Piggybacking on that discussion, I had heard some debate that the early debate between Biden and Trump was potentially a suggestion of an aide to make sure that if he did poorly, there would be enough time to convince him to get out. Did you hear anything of that? Is there anything to that? Otherwise, why would they do it so early?
So I spent a lot of time trying to answer exactly the question you just asked, because we've never seen that before. This is a debate before the conventions. I mean, neither one of them were technically the nominee yet. The conventions hadn't happened. So why did they do it? There was I forget how many pages it was, like a 4 or 5 page memo that was written by the political team for Biden, encouraging him to do this debate. So if you want to know the real reasons, you don't read that memo, because that's just like, I mean, it went through a series of arguments about early voting, which are legitimate. You know, people now, some states the voting starts in September, so if you do a lot of the debates end up being late September, October, people have already voted. There was, I don't know, a few other things. But what I learned is the real reason that they felt it was absolutely imperative, and by the way, there was division on this, but most of Biden's advisors were in favor of the early debate, was they were losing. And they needed something dramatic to change the dynamic. It wasn't a test case to see if he can make it or not make it. These were all the Biden team who would be the ones that stood around him like this to prevent him from being forced out. So that wasn't it. But the fact of the matter is, Trump had just gone through a criminal trial. He had been convicted of a felony, and he was 34. 34? 34. And all the relevant polling showed that he was beating Biden pretty soundly. Not just in the national polls, but in the battleground states. That he was, so they needed, and fundraising was drying up. So they needed something dramatic, and that's why they did it. And they got something dramatic, but it wasn't quite what they expected.
Yeah. Another question? Right up front.
Thank you. Jonathan, you report regularly on Trump, and you do a great job of hiding your incredulity of some of the things that happen.
Mm-hmm.
A colleague of yours, Terry Moran, was not able to do that and ended up not being able to maintain his job because of that. How do you report on a person whose ideas you clearly don't admire?
Well, look, I don't know if your last clearly don't admire his ideas. I put that aside. What I will say is that I report directly and bluntly about what is happening. And by the way, I did this. I covered the Obama White House, and they would sometimes get very irritated at me, just like the Trump people do. I mean, it's like, I'm not there to be annoying. I'm there to ask the questions that maybe they want avoided, and to find out things that, you know, that those in power would rather not be made public. That's kind of the job of a reporter. But it's also vital, I think, that a reporter be seen as a fair arbiter of this and not taking sides. And I don't take sides. I mean, I've got a very good friend of mine who's a colleague, a prominent journalist who goes so far as to say that he doesn't vote because he doesn't, even on election day, doesn't want to take sides. I think that's taking it too far, because reporters are also citizens and have a responsibility to vote, but I respect what he's saying. And when Trump came into the White House in 2017, he declared that, famously, the press is the enemy of the people. But besides that, there was something he said that was more insidious. That was awful. But he said that the press is the opposition party. Bannon elaborated on this in an interview with the New York Times in the first weeks of the Trump presidency, saying the Democrats aren't our real opponents, it's the press. That's the real opposition party. And we are not the opposition party. But if reporters can be, mainstream news organizations can be labeled as the opposition party, then you can just say, that's just like a Democratic press release, doesn't mean anything. And of course they're saying that, they're my opponents. So I got a text message, well, let me back up. So Trump said something about me end of August of last year on his Truth Social. It was the opening of the U.S. Open tennis tournament, and I was there with my daughter. It was late Sunday night, and my phone starts like going up, and he's like insulted something that happened that Sunday on the show. I'd anchored our Sunday show. He's upset about something Chris Christie said or something, and then he says, and Jonathan Karl, and he says, what the hell happened to his hair? So I was like, didn't really know where to go with that. So I just figured I would, so I texted the President of the United States, which is not a statement you usually make with any other president. But I said, I tried to make like light of it. I was like, well, maybe I should get hair advice from you. I'm just kind of like.
Said no one ever.
Right. And he responded by, not like taking it as a lighthearted comment and saying, you need journalism advice. You're doing like. And then I said, and he says, and he said this sentence. You're backing the wrong side. And now I'm serious. So I just said to him, I'm telling you, as you know, I don't back any side. And he does not, didn't take that particularly well. But you can't get out there and act like, and perform like you are the opponent of the President of the United States. But what did Harry Truman said? He said, give him hell, Harry, and his answer was, I just tell them the truth and they think it's hell. I've been very candid and very blunt. I wrote a book about January 6th. I talked about the series of events that led to January 6th, and after that I saw very clearly as a threat to American democracy. It's not taking a side. It's actually describing events that happened.
Yeah, I would say it's a strength of the book in that there are these amazing historical events described, and then I think you've wisely resisted that last sentence, and this is very bad.
Yeah.
Right? It just speaks for itself. In some ways can be far more powerful.
When Fox News first came on the air, Roger Ailes had the tagline, was actually a very good one. You can judge for yourself. You can decide whether or not they lived up to it. But the tagline was, we report, you decide. I think that's actually a good...
Yeah. So I saw some other hands. Ben?
Thanks to both of you for joining us. Jonathan, you've had a career that's, when you started, journalism looked very different.
Yeah.
Especially print journalism, but
Yep.
even news, TV journalism changed a lot. And Peter, you've come in at the end of that. But the path into journalism and what it means to be a journalist are very different than, Jonathan, when you started out. And I'm a professor here. I'm often, struggling to give advice to students who might be thinking about a career in journalism. You've got a bunch of students here. I'm curious, for both of you, what do you think about a career in journalism? What does that mean today? Who do we need to get into journalism, and how do you go about it? Some practical advice for the students in the audience.
You kind of had the last train out of the station, so you should go first on that now.
Okay, so I'll set it up just because you've got the more relevant perspective on that question. But I will say that one thing, Peter and I both started this exactly the same way, which is through student newspaper. And even though I became this TV guy and all this stuff, but I think that the most fundamental strength you need to succeed, actually, I would argue in almost any professional line of work, is the ability to communicate and communicate clearly and to write well. I never sought out television. My first job out of college was with the New Republic magazine. I worked for the New York Post, and weirdly this opportunity came up to go to CNN. It was supposed to be for 1 year to cover young people. I was the youth reporter, and then I kind of aged out of that. But I think that it's a very tough business line of work to get into, and I think it is immensely rewarding. I got into this in part because I loved reading news and I loved history, and I saw this as I knew I couldn't, I probably would have pursued a PhD in history somewhere if I didn't have this opportunity. I wanted to be on the front lines of watching history unfold. And every day, your job as a journalist is to go out there and learn something new. And they pay you for it. They may not pay you very well at all, but they will pay you for it. And I think it's I can't imagine what I would have done if I hadn't taken this path. It was very hard in the beginning. It's very challenging. I would say my one piece of advice, besides learning how to write and write clearly and write concisely, and to understand your history and it's all liberal arts background. That's really what you need. Is if you're doing political journalism in any way, honestly, take to heart they don't take sides. I mean, look, there's great opinion journalism. You can go do that. I'm not saying you can. That's a different line of work, and that. But if you're going to try to do anything like what Peter and I do, understand that it's important. I mean, I think desperately important to have sources of information that can be trusted. Where our job is to go out there and find out what actually happened, not to convince people of one thing or another.
And I mean, what a time to be doing the job. I kind of find myself kind of in awe sometimes of all the different things we're reporting on. I just spent 3 weeks in Texas covering another story with a few different generations of people at ABC, right? People who came up in the 90s and the 70s, and they kind of described the glory days of television news, back when they would charter a private jet to get tape in time for the show. And they were kind of telling these fantastic stories about what it was like to cover the news back in the 80s, when it was a kind of TV news was a different thing. But at the same time, we were kind of discussing some of the advantages that comes from kind of doing this in 2026 and the way the industry has changed. The fact that all things considered, we're being trained to shoot video on our iPhones. We have these tools that allow us to transcribe things in real time for quotes. We have the opportunity to interview anyone in the world at any moment over a video call. And so in a way, there's certainly less money and there's far fewer jobs, but the tools that exist and the opportunities are kind of remarkable, to the point in which I graduated in 2020. I was your student in 2020, right into the pandemic, and I was freaked out by the job market. So I kind of went off to do a different job for a few years. And because I didn't think it was a safe idea, and then ABC came through weird Dartmouth connection, actually, now that I think about it, with an overnight job on the desk, which is the breaking news desk. And it was the best decision I've ever made in a way, in that I got to kind of use all the skills that kind of came out of this, 4-year education. And my job is so cool on a daily basis in that I just get to learn things, properly understand them, digest them, put them out in various different forms, and online, on radio, on air. It's like, I mean, the job market is bleak, but if you really want to do it, and if you're like writing for the D at the moment, for example, you should certainly do it, because it's not, we do need really good people doing it. And I can't think of a better place for people to kind of jump into the industry from.
Well, that's actually a perfect note on which to stop. So thank you both for your time and for your research.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Copies of the book at a table back there, if anybody would like to grab a copy.
Are you going to be signing?
Yeah, sure, I'd love to.
All right,
Yeah,
and Jonathan
yeah, yeah.
says he'll sign.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, that was great.
Thank you.
So I really didn't see your outline before.